Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Sero Boost. And on this week's episode, we are going to talk about professional network with the perspective of joyful networking for lasting career happiness. And please meet Dr. Natascha F. Saunders, a dynamic career coach renowned for her transformative impact from classrooms to boardrooms. I really love this part. As founder of the Youth Career Coach, Inc. and associate director and career coach at Harvard Kennedy School, she brings unparalleled expertise in higher education, human resources, leadership development, and personal branding. With a doctorate in leadership and communications, an MBA, and multiple coaching certifications, she's a distinguished authority in her field. Featured in outlets like the New York Times and NPR, Natascha champions joyful networking for lasting career happiness, guiding individuals of all ages and degree levels into coveted roles at top organizations. Thanks so much for joining us today, Natascha.
Thank you for having me. I'm beyond excited. A little nervous, but super excited.
Yeah, I'm excited as well because I think, happiness is such a broad concept and we don't get to talk about, career very often. For me, I think it's so important because we spend at least 8 hours a day, 5 days a week at work. And some people spend way more time than that. And so I think to have a lasting career happiness is a challenge that all of us need to figure out at a certain point. A lot of people say, I struggled so much earlier in my career to be able to get here. And most of people that I have talked to, they sort of get into a settled stage where they feel happy and fulfilled in their career, probably 5-10 years into their careers. Some people not even that, maybe even longer. Yeah. So it takes a lot of time for us to figure all these things out. And so I'm excited to pick your brains on the topic because, I myself, I'm finding it hard these days to sort of find that happiness in my career again, because sometimes it happens, it's there and then you lose it, you kind of get back into it, right? So I think today's topic will definitely be very helpful for that. Before we get into that part of the conversation though, we would love to get to know you a bit better. We've got this part we called Have You Met Natascha? And I'm going to get to know you and the audience will get to know you better through some of your favorite things. So
sounds good.
First thing first, I would love to know what your favorite book is.
My favorite book, it's an oldie, actually. This book was published in 2003. I was freshly out of undergrad, and I came across this book called The Girl's Guide to Power and Success. And honestly, that book really changed my perspective on just going for it, asking for it, making room for yourself, not waiting to be invited. And that book kind of really set me up on my trajectory. So it is one of my favorite books. I hope to meet the author one day.
That's beautiful. I haven't heard of the book before, but that sounds interesting. So
it's so good. It's by Susan. Her name is Susan Wilson Solivic. And she's just amazing. Yeah, it's a great book. I think girls should read the book.
Yes, absolutely. And I will do that. And I do hope that you'll meet the author as well. Yeah. That sounds wonderful. What about a movie you've enjoyed recently?
That is a good question because I'm not like a movie person. I hope that doesn't, get me any bad points. But I was just sitting here as you were asking that. And I did watch a movie, but it's really like a comedy / action movie. Another oldie, it's called Blast. And there's a comedian in it named Eddie Griffin. And he's like this ex-Navy SEAL who has to stop this guy who poses as an environmentalist whose issue is about oil being spilt in the ocean and all this jazz. And he come to find out he's like a really bad guy and Eddie has to stop him. And so I thought it was a good movie because Eddie Griffin to me is just like a funny person. So to see him in a role where he's not what you normally expect. And then I've always had a heart I coach veterans a lot. And so, even though it's not real, I still have a heart for the Navy and the Army and the military in general. So it's a really good movie. I love it.
Yeah, that sounds fun. I'm not a huge movie person myself. I mean, I used to really love movies. Lately, I haven't watched a lot just because, sometimes you go through a phase where you're like, I don't really see anything interesting.
Exactly. That's how it's been for so long. And I'm like, I think too, like the environmental piece, which is such a big issue now, especially with a lot of my clients want to work in climate. And so it just had like all of those checkpoints, which made it really interesting.
Yeah, that does sound like an interesting movie. I'll check it out. Thank you. And I'm wondering if you're a podcast listener yourself.
You know what? I am. But I think I'm getting into it more because at first I wasn't. And then I had to figure out, where do I fit this in? And then I started fitting it in when I'm driving to work. And I'm like, this is perfect. I need something to listen to. And so I do listen to podcasts. One of my actually role models his name is Eric Thomas, and we call him E.T. And he came out first as like the hip hop preacher. And then we like call him E.T. and now we call him Doctor because he has his PhD. And so I listen to him a lot. He's extremely motivational. And when I was going through my doctorate, I remember discovering him and I pulled his dissertation so that I could have it on my desktop as an inspiration for me to make it to the finish line. So between him and another guy, Myron Golden, that I listen to a lot. Yeah.
That sounds great. Thank you for sharing all new recommendations to me.
Yeah.
And how about a role model or maybe a couple of different role models in your life?
That's a tough one. There's so many facets to that, like I think of probably my mom, I mean, I know that's like cliche answer, but as a woman who's in her 80s now, who grew up in the deep South of Georgia with so much racism and segregation, to move up north when jobs weren't giving them a chance. And she ended up working in a meat market and kind of worked her way through and ended up retiring from working at a law school. So she kind of is, kind of like my role model a bit, I will have to say.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I don't think it's cliche. I think it's a great thing if we can say that our parents are role models, because it doesn't happen all the time for some people, especially for those that lost their parents when they were younger, for example, right? So it's beautiful if you share that. Yeah, my mom's my role model. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, and I share her with. Because my cousins, we have a really big family, and I do have cousins whose mom died when they were really young. And so they're really close to my mom. And so I remember we had a big party for her birthday, and my friends came and they're like, you don't mind that your cousins are running the party and running the show and they were the MC? I said, no, I'm sitting in the back having a good time eating dinner and I don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
So I'm all about sharing her. Yeah, they take care of her just as much as I do.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. And yeah, I think you're so right. It's just, you sit back and enjoy and let them run the show. That's totally okay.
I'm good.
And I think that's another beautiful thing about your mom, right? To be able to take in nieces and nephews or support, the extended family besides doing whatever you were sharing with us before, working so many jobs. I think that's tough work, and something to admire from your mom and also all moms.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. Finally, let's talk about a course that has inspired you. I would love to know what you learned that was really inspirational. This could be from a long time ago, like, when earlier in your career, or even when you were younger, or it could be something that you learned recently.
That's a good question. Now I feel like I have two classes I'm trying to pick from.
You can talk about both.
Well, yeah, maybe a short synopsis. I think the first course, it was later in life. I was working on my MBA, and I got a chance to take an elective, and it was a career class. And it was a career management class, Dr. Frank Satterthwaite. And I remember getting his book thinking, I want to do this. I'm going to do this. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a career coach. And it was just also, it introduced me to the theory that there's a whole academic space behind career decision-making that I didn't know existed. And I really got that introduction from him, and it just opened up like my whole world. More recently, actually this past week, there's a lady named Cassandra Cummings. She started a business or a movement called Stocks and Stilettos. And it's all about women and us getting back into finance and understanding the stock market. And I started my career working in finance many years ago when I got out of college. And I kind of just left it. And so I reconnected, and I've been taking her class for the week and since last week. And I'm just like, where have I been? Dividends. Like, where have I been? I'm just so happy right now. And so I'm like looking at my portfolio, and, I don't want to say, the stocks that I'm looking at, but, there's one in particular that's going to split 50-1 in a couple of weeks. And so it's just reigniting my love for finance and investing in stocks. And I'm just on cloud 9 right now. So, yes, that class is making me excited.
That sounds interesting and exciting. Yeah, I think finance is something that scares a lot of people, including myself. I'm like, I don't understand what's going on.
Yeah. And she makes it so simple, and she gives you like little homework. You got to go find these stocks and then figure out where they open and close, and then how much, what is the, what they're paying. And, it reignites me. And I think for new people, it makes it very easy to understand that it's pretty fun when you think about it.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely going to be fun once you get the grasp of it. It scares you when you don't understand it. So that's a great perspective. Thank you for sharing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so I think now we've gotten to know you heaps better. The last bit about learning about finance, that was very interesting to me. I love that you talk about learning. Even though you're very established in your career, it's very inspirational for people to know. And I think another thing that helps with learning is networking. So let's talk about joyful networking for our career happiness. Yeah. So as I was saying, the show is about happiness overall, not just about happiness in our career. Let's talk about happiness first. So what does happiness mean to you, Natascha?
Happiness to me, I would say, is moments of peace and moments where I don't feel any anxiety, where my body is at peace. I feel like my energy is calm, and I'm just present. And wherever I am, I'm just present in that moment. And for me, I smile. So it's going to also include a smile.
That's great. Yeah, I love that definition. It's personal to you. It's kind of different from what we tend to hear on the show. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
And what about some misconceptions that you think people tend to get when it comes to happiness?
That's a great question. If I may also say, not just people, but even me, I think the misconception could be that happiness should exist all the time. And then I would probably push back and say, well, it does if we think of it in moments. And so I'm at least when I'm coaching, my students might be a macro, thinking really big. And I like to bring things down to a very micro level. And so I think a misconception could be that in this moment, maybe there's no happiness here, right? And so I think if we break the happiness down into many moments, maybe this day was a bit tough, but at this moment, sitting here, drinking this clean water that you had access to, you can find a moment of happiness here. Or I'm applying to jobs and, it's been difficult, but you had one great conversation with that alum, and that was a moment of happiness. So I think maybe the misconception is happiness in this big, grandiose thing versus could we break it all the way down and really identify little moments like that moment made me happy. At this moment, I feel a sense of happiness.
Yeah, totally. I think that is so true. And it's good to look at it from both perspectives, right? Because you were saying that for some people, they think that, happiness needs to be there all the time. It's not really true. But at the same time, it is there all the time if we start looking. And I guess a big part of it is probably just because of how busy, quote unquote busy, we say we are. And I think even for myself, I've noticed that when it's really hectic, it's not like a sense of busyness per se, but when it's really hectic, a lot is happening, you kind of freeze and you don't really pay attention. And what that means is you're probably doing nothing because you're incapable of doing anything, but you also don't really pay attention to what is good and what is, right there. And that, I guess talked about on this show a lot, the practice of gratitude and mindfulness. And I think, being mindful of the moment is so much harder than it sounds, even though it's kind of like something everyone talks about. I think it's so hard. I swear to you, it's so hard. Like even for me, like sometimes having a coffee, that is enjoyable, but I just feel like I'm rushing through it. I forgot how good it is.
Yeah, it's an activity that I do that I don't know how you all might think about it, but I will share. So when you talk about kind of happiness and us rushing through the moment, I intentionally have places where I think about happiness or joy in that moment. And usually that is when I'm in my car. I try to be really purposeful about that time. And so I have this thing I do, whether the day is good or the day is bad. And I go through the entire alphabet and I will come up with something that I'm happy about or thankful for that begins with every single letter of the alphabet. And then by the time I finish the alphabet, I'm usually feeling better or finding moments of gratitude and happiness. And so I might be driving and I'm like, hey, I'm so happy about the atmosphere that I'm in right now. This sun is beaming on my skin, right? Or B, I'm thankful for these berries that I have in my smoothie right now, Or C, I'm so happy I had a conversation with one person today. And I will literally do that for the entire alphabet. And so I've suggested it to others, like doing something in the moment, it will remind you of where your happiness is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great tip. And thank you for sharing what you do. So now let's talk about today's topic, joyful networking. We talked about happiness. We talked about the little moments. The focus of today, though, is about career. And I think, again, happiness in our lives would be, I think, a big part of it would be attributed to how happy we feel at work. And a lot of the times when people are like, oh yeah, I'm not really feeling great, and I'm guessing like 8 times out of 10 it would probably be because of something career related. You're not really happy or satisfied or content with where you are, and so this concept of joyful networking is interesting in the sense that we probably will focus more on the actual doing of the work, right? Some people might not be enjoying what they're doing. They probably don't even think about networking because they might be already really caught up in what they're doing. And I noticed that for myself, especially sometimes, like if I'm really just like caught up in what I'm doing, I'm like, it's been 6 months and I haven't gone to any networking event.
Yeah.
And then,
it's so easy to get like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it's even worse. It's like, oh, it's been a year since the last networking event I went to. It's been a year since I made any new connection. So, it affects the level of happiness at work quite a bit for myself. And I know that it could be the same for other people. And then it kind of affects my happiness level. And then at the same time, when I have a really good experience of networking with like-minded people, I feel really uplifted and connected to whatever I'm doing. And I feel better in life, So how do we approach this concept? And what exactly is joyful networking for people that might be a little bit hesitant to start networking in the first place?
That is such a good question in thinking of kind of the joyful part of networking. So speaking from my heart, which is what I do, I can't make it up, but I think the joyful piece, I think, is in really external and internal. So externally, the joyful piece is the body language that you're exuding day to day, the smiling or the head nodding that you agree with someone, or physically making space for someone to enter your circle. I think the intangible is really the respect that you should have for someone else, that you want to meet them and you want to get to know them. And I think when those things come together, that you have this ready to make space, ready to be kind to someone new or someone that you would like to get to know better. And then also the other side of, why am I doing this? I actually sincerely desire to get to know someone, to know what they do, how they do it, and to learn from them. And so I think if you can connect with the why you're building these relationships, and also I think there's a respect piece about you. I think many times when I'm coaching individuals, they forget about how amazing they are. They forget because they're just doing what they're doing, and they're not seeing it as an accomplishment. They're not seeing it that they've had results. And so the beauty of having a coach too is to also remind you of your greatness, remind you of the skills you have, remind you of kind of what you're doing and why you're doing it and the impact you're making. And I think when those come together, the body language, the reason for being, all of that, when that comes together, I think it can make the networking joyful. That's kind of how I see it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think it's so important about how you present yourself when you're going to these networking events, right? Because it can be really daunting. I remember when I was still a student going into my first networking event, I was kind of like, why am I here? Who am I? Like, will they take me seriously? And I remember I went to a lot of different people to kind of get advice. And one person said, don't discount yourself as just a student. You're much more than that.
Yes.
Such great advice.
I agree. And I always remind students to, like, you are the now, like you are the present, you are the innovative, right? And so use that to your advantage. And if you're not, say you've been out working 20, 30, 40 years, well, you have a level of expertise that they should want to learn about. So lean into you being more of an expert in your space. And so I think all that should come together. You plus the external factors, plus why you really desire to get to know someone would make the experience a little bit more joyful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also another thing that probably bugs a lot of people when it comes to networking, which is the fact that they don't know how to approach building the network. So
Mhm.
when you talk about presenting yourself well, that is a really good thing to start with. But then, what is the next step? You go into the event or whichever
Mhm.
networking opportunity that is. Could be not just an event, but like you just randomly meet these people in a
Mhm.
project or whatever that
Mhm.
might be, and it's now a really tough situation because you need to choose who you're going to talk to. A lot of people kind
Yeah.
of go in and talk to everyone and end up getting no new connections really because
Yep.
it's just like,
Yep.
you have conversations in passing. So I think the most important thing is, how do you actually make the network rich and
Yeah.
enriching for you? Because it shouldn't be random. As far as I've learned, it shouldn't be random, and you need to be strategic about building your network. So what kind of a
Mhm.
network would actually be joyful networking for you and for us? So how should we
Mhm.
decide on who to approach, who to talk to, who to build connection with? And if we decide to not build connections with certain people, how do we make sure we don't offend them?
Mm. Oh, there's so much to that. Oh my goodness. That question is huge. We may have to take that in parts, okay?
Yeah, let's do it.
Um so the first piece of kind of the how and the approaching of the person, um I think two things. Now, the first is if it can be done. If you signed up to go to an event, you probably know who might be there, possibly. So I think doing a little bit of the pre work, who do you think might be there? What is it that you want? I think people may not want to admit, well, I want this. I want to have a conversation. I want to have a dinner meeting. I want to be introduced to someone in human resources. I think that if you can be honest with yourself on what is your want and commit to asking for it, right? Like literally say, as uncomfortable as this may be, if I meet someone from X company, I'm going to ask to be introduced to someone in HR. Just make a commitment to do it, right? So one thing that I usually coach my clients on is when they're speaking with someone, really three things aside from the ask is mention what you have in common. Something, and the fact that you're both there at this event means that you have a common interest in whatever this topic is. And so you want to diffuse the environment, the stress, etc., by saying whatever we have in common. Oh, I noticed we both went to so and so, or we both are studying climate, whatever that is, mention that. And my second tip is to compliment. Find something to compliment the person on. When you do that, it just, good things happen when you say nice things to people. And then by the time you do that, I think you'll be able to ask good questions, try to learn something, and think about, my interview coach years ago was an attorney. So we focused a lot on the close, as they would call it, the closing argument. And so when you're at these events or wherever, what is the close? You either got to ask to exchange contact information, ask to connect on LinkedIn, ask, hey, what's the next event you plan to attend? Maybe I need to be there too. So
Yeah.
whatever that is, make sure you have an ask at the end of that conversation. And to your point, if it's someone that you don't want to build rapport with, I think I have two thoughts to that. First, you have the right to just peacefully say, thank you so much, Natascha, it was nice to meet you. Take good care. And that's it. Be out, end of story, right? But I might challenge you, unless you feel uncomfortable. Now, if you feel uncomfortable about this person, please move on to the next. But if it's I'm not sure what I could do for them, or I don't know what, I would still challenge you to obtain a contact information, or at the very least a LinkedIn. Because I have found a lot of times you may not need that person now. They no interest whatsoever. And then a year from now, your sister is looking to work for Neiman Marcus and you're like, well, I did randomly meet someone who's a buyer. I mean, you just like, it may not be what you want to do, but I think that the networking piece, if we can also think of the joy, there's joy in being able to support others, because I do feel like that comes back to you. So if we could remove I'm going to get to know you. Yes, I want to get to know you, but more so my circle of influence, my network, my friends, my family, we're all going to benefit if I get to know you at some point in time. And so I think if we can just like, not just think about ourselves, but think about our communities at large, it might make it just a little bit easier.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a great tip. I think it's sometimes just awkward to kind of be in a networking event and talk to multiple people at the same time.
Yeah,
and naturally you just talk to some people more than others. And I think sometimes I was on the receiving end of that, which is why I kind of find it hard to navigate, because you want it to be a fun experience for yourself and for others, because, it's got to be joyful networking, which is why I asked the question. But I guess, as long as we get the contact detail and, exchange a few words and keep in mind who they are, then we should be good.
Yeah.
The thing is, I remember going to this event. It was not a networking event, but I had a lot of people, and I don't even remember what exactly it was about. And I remember talking to a lot of people, like very exciting and interesting people. And I added them, and sometimes I was like, oh, I think I remember that person who's a lawyer and also plays the violin. What's their name? I can't remember now. And I feel like that's the struggle as well. On the one hand, you have people that struggle and never network, and on the other hand, sometimes when you're in the zone and you really want to network, you also probably fall into the trap of not remembering who you talk to.
Yeah.
You probably add a bunch of people on LinkedIn and you forget about it. So do you have any tips for that?
I do. And, you're right. It happens to a lot of people. I do think I'm much more tactical. And so when I'm working with someone, I usually will say we need to debrief that event. And so I think a few things. Back in my heyday, they would have business cards. We don't really do that anymore. And I would say, okay, write something on the back. But you should have, if you're still a writer, great. Otherwise, take a pause, like maybe every half hour in the event, step to the side and use your cell phone, open up the notes tab, and quickly jot down everything you remember. Just like one or two things about each person that you met. If you don't want to do that, then go run outside, go to the restroom, open up your audio app in your phone and just say, met Natascha from Harvard, met Sue from so-and-so. And now you have it recorded in your phone. And usually I don't recommend people sending a LinkedIn request without a note. And so you should put in there, great to meet you at so-and-so, so that you have it in the note. Another thing I do and recommend is when you add a contact in your phone, you do need to put something in the notes so that you remember, who it is. But I think all of that, either write it down, audio record it, send a note on LinkedIn, whatever. But if you forget, don't feel bad. Just... And you know what? We're connected, and I'm not quite sure I remember where. Can you refresh my memory with a little smiley face?
Yeah.
It happens all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's such a great tips. Again, this is a principle in a matter of stopping, pausing, and reflecting. And sometimes at events we get too overwhelmed. We don't do that. So yeah, that's a good tip.
That's why you got to have a plan before the event. Even if you get to the event, before you work the room, just stand to the side and be like, okay, I'm here. This is what I'm going to do. This is my plan. Or at the very least, when you leave the event the next day, talk to a friend and be like, hey, I want to just run through who I met yesterday so it kind of jogs my memory. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think making notes like that would make the event more impactful as well. So you remember it much more and much better.
Yeah. And remember when I said compliment and what you have in common, and that's not just verbally, it's when you send the email follow-up.
Yeah, definitely,
Mm-hmm.
definitely. I love that. I think it's probably a big trap for people to not do the follow up, right? So I think doing the actual follow up is so important. It's not about the adding on the people on the spot; it's about the following up. Yeah, I think it's actually helped me quite a bit in my early career to be in different joyful networking opportunities.
Yes.
But I think for a lot of people, they might still be doubtful because a lot of people have this traditional approach to finding work because they think that networking is something that is so daunting, is such a waste of time. So,
Uh-huh.
what would be some examples you can share with us to kind of enlighten us? Because I'm sure a lot of people have found amazing career breakthroughs through networking.
So I can think of a few. Um, I can think of one person that I was coaching. Um, I remember her complaint was that her family could not help her because she didn't come from a family that did anything remotely close to what she wanted to do, work in corporate marketing, and her dad was a mechanic. And I randomly challenged her and said, just want you to go by your dad's shop one day and ask your dad who are some of the cool people that are his customers that come in regularly for oil changes or whatever. And what do they do? And where do they work? And needless to say, she had that conversation, came back. We worked through a conversation she would have with her dad for her dad to introduce her to a guy who worked for, which is a big professional hockey team here in Massachusetts. And she ended up getting that introduction and then landing a position. And that has happened so many times. And I think that I'd like to dispel the myth of you don't have access and you don't know anyone. I think it's just, I wrote this article once on demystifying networking. And I'm like, it's not true. Let me map out who you actually know. And then what I don't think people do enough of is what I call collecting intelligence, collecting data on the individuals that you know. So say you know Mary. Well, Mary works at a hospital. And it's like, okay, but she knows HR. I mean, she knows the department manager, the nursing station manager. And last I checked, every hospital has every position from lawyers to HR to IT tech to hospitality to cafeteria workers to maintenance to engineers, all work in hospitals. And so I think if we can also diffuse that I don't have access, I may not know someone, I think that definitely goes a long way. And for that student, it worked tremendously well. I've had other clients do as you do, set up networking meetings, but a little bit more strategic. So they didn't really do the event route. So I'm an introvert. Many people think I'm an extrovert, but I'm a high INTJ. And I love working with people that are introverts. And so we're more of a behind the scenes networking person. We may not want to be in big crowds with big events. And if we do, we've probably already identified the one or two people that we want to meet and we go and meet them. And then that's it. We're done for the day. And that's okay. There's no rules. There's no metrics. Who cares how many people you get the number? If you get that one phone number, go and celebrate. You're all set. And so with this particular person, we went through different alumni contacts. We identified individuals in New York and in DC, sent emails, and set up one-on-one coffee chats. And then he went to DC and New York both for a couple of days, like a Thursday, Friday, and the weekend, and had back-to-back meetings. And so I think just encouraging people, these stories happen. You decide what your comfort level is. There's no rules to this. So if you're behind the scenes person, you do that one off, that one phone call, and that's fine too.
Absolutely. That's great.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing that you're an introvert. I think this is
Yes.
actually a question that a lot of people will have. I used to ask this question all the time because I'm also a classic introvert, and networking is so daunting.
It is.
I think a lot of people will start to wonder at this point if they've never researched networking or done any networking before, and they're like us. I'm very introverted. I don't know what to do. How do I approach these people? If I'm in a big room, I just want to be in the corner. If that is the case, and I'm sure you probably have gone through that phase once in this lifetime, what would you recommend
I still
to
go
those?
through it.
Yeah, there you go. Great,
Yeah.
great, because it's more relatable. So what would you do?
So I've been in some interesting situations. I will admit I'm that person who enters a room and probably goes straight to the food table because I need to hold something. It's how I've always been, whether I'm holding a plate or I'm holding a pen. I just need to hold something, and then I feel a little bit better about being there. And so I would recommend that to someone as a potential strategy. I would also recommend that you walk in the room, find a little corner, not too in the corner, but I want you to observe, right? I want you, there's a military term called recon, and like you walk in and you take inventory of what's going on in the room. You don't need to rush at it. Stand there. Look at the people. Who's talking to who? Is anybody standing by themselves? If they are, that's usually a person you can go up to and introduce yourself because they're probably feeling just like you. So identify anybody that might be standing by themselves. That is the first person you introduce yourself to. The second, or the first or the second, could be who invited you? Who's the host, right? Is there a mistress or a mister of ceremonies? Is someone hosting the event? Someone sponsored the event? Find the host, whoever's leading, in charge, and go up and introduce yourself to that person. And then you can ask that person and say, oh my goodness, thank you for hosting this event. I'm so excited to be here. Let me ask you a question. Is there someone here you think I should meet? And then let them tell you, yes, I think you should meet Mark, right? And if you can use that, you walk in, step one, take inventory. Who's friendly? Who's smiling? Do you see anybody alone? Introduce yourself to that person. Come back. Who's the host? Try to find the person leading the event. And then ask them, who else can I meet? Now, you can use that question no matter who you meet. You can meet me and say, Tasha, who do you know here? Right? Because I was the lone person in the corner. And then I'll say, well, so-and-so invited me. And then you do this. Would you mind introducing me? Always, people don't use that strategy enough, like asking, who else do you know? How did you get here? Can you introduce me to someone? If you used any of those three, trust me, by the end of the night, okay, it will diffuse the stress and you will probably have met a few really great people.
Yeah, that's a really great tip. Thank you. I think that would definitely help the introverts in the room, in the virtual room, of course, because we are doing this podcast virtually.
Yes.
And I think we've got quite a few tips already throughout this podcast about, joyful networking. And to kind of emphasize the message, to close it out before we move on to something more practical, what would you say to be the benefit of joyful networking once we have mastered the art of it?
Ooh, that's a good question. How can I have something in mind. I'm just trying to think of how to word it. Benefits. So, not to get too sappy in the world, but I feel like once you've connected with why you do what you do, and maybe there is when I'm coaching people trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives, whatever that is. And I'll say, what is a problem that really irks you that you want to help solve? Or the opposite, something you're passionate about that you really enjoy doing, or whatever your why is. So I think the benefit is when you do X, you get Y. And that means you get to, if it's housing, if you go up and introduce yourself to the head of the housing department, you might get a job that will help you fulfill your dream of ensuring homeless people have a place to live. Or if you do this, if you meet this person and introduce yourself, then you know what? You might get a chance to apply for that scholarship. So I think it's the benefit, only you can determine what the benefit is, but you have to go back to, what is my why? What is my ultimate goal? I have to hold that dear, because that is what's going to give you a bit more confidence to walk over and introduce yourself. And if I may add the piece about the joyfulness too, when I think of joyfulness, it's not just about you. We should also think of the joy that we're giving the other person. And that other person has done something, created something really cool. They're doing really great work. And we give people joy by asking them about themselves and asking them, why do you do this? How do you do this? Oh my goodness. Like, that's giving joy. So if we can also remember, we're not just about us we have joyful networking, but when we do something, we're acknowledging and we're giving joy at the same time. And I think it could be really reciprocal, and that can help us move better in these spaces.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for summarizing those benefits to networking, because again, we know that it's really great for our career, our joy, our happiness at work. But sometimes we just forget. And I think a little reminder would be nice from time to time. So, for example, somebody like me who has not gone to a networking event in God knows how long, I do not remember the last time I went to a networking event, to be honest. This is a really great reminder.
Yeah. And maybe that's okay too.
Yeah.
Maybe you log into a webinar and you send someone a DM in the chat, and then you exchange contact information and you set up coffee. That's fine too.
Yeah. Oh, I actually randomly ran into people recently. I didn't go to networking events, but I randomly ran into some wonderful people I've been talking to lately, and that's great, Yes. But I think being a little bit more proactive with networking from time to time, intentionally, that would really help, because I feel like when I meet new people, my perspectives change. And I know that my world is not this bubble of work I do every day. Yeah. It's so much more than this. And it's exciting and it's fun, and you learn new things. Even if we don't cover anything else, I think the matter of broadening perspectives and learning from new people is actually something that me personally, I would like to think about more. And I'm kind of talking about this, so I'm reminding myself pretty much. Thank you for sharing that. So now let's talk about something a bit more practical for our audience. Okay. I mean, obviously you've shared a lot of strategies and tips, but for someone who is listening to this podcast, my guess is they're probably new to networking. They've probably never done this before, or they have been going to networking events, but they haven't really gained much out of it. They don't really feel the joy in networking, perhaps. So which practice would you recommend? This could be something that you employ personally to cultivate joyful networking.
Okay, I think the practice of it. So I think two things. And I'm going to be a little bit redundant in the first one, is making sure you're clear on your why you need to do this. I know I may sound like a broken record, but if the why is because, you have 2 kids that are going to be going to college and you need to increase your income, like that is a why, So you really want to kind of remind yourself of that. And then I think the practice of it is no place is off limits. So just like you had brought up, I was out and about running errands. You can be in a coffee shop and happen to see someone carrying a bag with an employer name on it that you are interested in. There's no place that's off limits, right? And so I think that I would say the practice of it is start where you're most comfortable. The next time you are at a family cookout at the barbecue and you haven't seen a couple of your cousins in a long time, ask them, hey, how's it going? You know what? Can I take you to dinner one day? I'd love to chat with you about what you've been doing career-wise, and ask them some questions, and then ask a cousin to make an introduction for you. So I think the practice of it can, let's not be around strangers. How about just practicing with your family? How about practicing with 3 classmates that you went to high school with and call them up because you haven't talked to them in a long time and they probably know people. So practice means remove the stranger, go back to friends and family, and start having some conversations right where you feel comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great tip. Thank you for sharing that. I need
Absolutely.
that too. Yeah, that's great because I actually have the same, I would say, misconception or, preconceived notion that, like if no one in my family can actually help me because I do something so different. But I'm guessing no. Now that I've had this conversation with you, I might be able to just go back to them and find out new insights. Actually, for me, it's a little different because I'm a migrant. But so this probably doesn't apply to everyone. But still, it's great to start somewhere and talking to friends and family, even just to kind of get some context because they're not living here, but they might know someone here.
Right.
So there you go.
Right. And I think too, when we think about, I use the term yield a lot. Will this conversation yield a result or input of some kind? And then I use the analogy of planting seeds, right? So when we build these relationships, let's also think about the timing. Is it urgent? Do you need to network and build these joyful communities urgently because time is sensitive? You're going to be evicted. You need to get a contract. Then we do need to kind of think about that and have a hard ask at the end of these conversations. But if you are just planting seeds, maybe Cousin Joe doesn't know anyone today, but how do you know next week he's going to go bowling with his brothers and meet somebody who works at a tech company? I mean, you don't know. So also think about it as I owe it to myself to build relationships, to plant seeds, right? And so they may yield a harvest in the long term, right?
Yeah.
To kind of keep that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that analogy. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So now we are approaching the end of the podcast already.
Oh my gosh.
Honestly, I can talk about this topic. You made it. But I honestly can talk to you about this topic so much more as I have many other questions. I guess I'm gonna save it for another one. Next time, hopefully when you come back to the show. Before we let you go, we've got open mic, as I mentioned earlier before we started the recording. This is your platform to talk about anything you would like to share with our audience. It doesn't have to be about today's topic. It could be about anything. So go for it, Natascha.
Wow, this is I feel like it's the TV shows, like those big singing shows, and you get on stage and you have your 1 minute of fame. You know what? I'm going to leave you all with an acronym. And this acronym, I have used it. I have written about it. I have a copyright on it. And I'm working on a book with this acronym. And the acronym is MICRO. MICRO. And so why this matters is helping you think about your personal and your professional brand. So we're talking about networking, we're talking about careers, and all of that comes into play when we think about your brand. So the micro formula, the M stands for materials. So thinking about, what does my resume look like? What does my cover letters look like? Anything that's material, business cards, whether it's a QR code or a traditional business card. The I stands for image, as in, yes, what do you look like? Your hairstyle, the colors that you wear. And when you think of joyful networking, think about, I'm a scarf person. It's kind of my trademark. And so in other cases, if I want to bring joy, my scarf might be pink because color does impact people's moods and your own mood. And so C for the micro is communication. How are you communicating with people? Are you using their names? In joyful networking, you want to actually use the person's name at least 2 or 3 times, at the beginning, once in the middle, and then once at the end. Mark, it was so nice to meet you. So think about your communication, written and verbal and nonverbal as far as your body language. The R in micro stands for reputation. And so really thinking about your reputation, how do people think of you? You know, I know when we all grew up as kids, many people heard the phrase, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I don't know who made that up because I don't think it's true. Words can hurt. And so really assessing your reputation, I have challenged people to send out an anonymous survey to friends, to former colleagues, to former bosses, to get some insight on how they really view you anonymously. And then make sure you're Googling yourself as much as you can, not just your name, but doing the image feature in the PDFs, in the yourname.doc, all the ways you can go through and see where you stand with your reputation. And the O in micro is online. Where are you online? Are you online? Do you own your domain name on the web? I think that's important, even if you don't build out your website. Even if you're not a LinkedIn person, just having your name locked down, I think would be a smart thing to do. And some people use social media as a virtual Rolodex, so to speak, but not really to push out content. And so really thinking about your brand and all this joyful networking is where micro comes in. So materials, image, communication, reputation, and online presence.
Mm-hmm. Oh, beautiful. I love that. I love that you're writing a book on the topic.
Yes, I am.
Do we know when
excited.
the book will come out?
You know what? My goal is this summer, but I'm pushing it because it's actually already drafted and I had someone kind of look through it and my attorney already put forth the copyright and I have like a quiz, an assessment quiz that I give people so that they can see kind of where they are with their branding. Like, are you publishing? Are you doing speaking engagements? Do you know the right people? Do you have an elevator pitch? And so I'm working aggressively on it this year because I want it out this year. I wrote it last year and paused to start I rolled out my own certificate program for people that want to be certified student career coaches. And so I was so focused on getting that out. It's launched. I have a great partnership with a national coaching association called the Professional Association of Resume Writers and Career Coaches. We call it PARC. And so now that that's off the races, I can go back to finish my book. And I got accepted into seminary school at Princeton. And I'm supposed to start this summer. So I'm trying to get it done before I do seminary. So we'll see.
Yeah, wow. There's a lot happening for you. Yes. Yeah. Well, congrats and good luck. I'm excited to see your book come out soon. And definitely we'll make sure to link your website so that our audience can find out more about it. Speaking of which, where should our audience go to check out when, for example, your new book comes out or just get in touch with you?
Sure. You can just go to my website. It's NataschaFsaunders.com. Real easy, NataschaFsaunders.com. You can Google me and I'm on LinkedIn. That's my bread and butter too. So whatever works, you can find me online. Thank you for asking. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much, Natascha. It's been so great talking to you. You've been listening to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast produced by the Happiness Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, ha.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.